So I do love those drawing videos because I love being able to see it kind of come to life in front of me. I think it just helps me remember that. But I also want to hit the same information now in a little bit more specific way, also with a few different pictures. So that's what we're going to try to do here. So we'll first look at this picture here, and it's labeled mechanoreceptors, but it has all sorts of different nerve fibers, right, that will sense different components within the skin. And these also occur in ligaments, and muscles, different types of tissue that have pain receptors as well. So some of these receptors now respond to mechanical deformity. That's the mechanoreceptors component. Some of these are going to respond to chemical stimuli. Those are more the free nerve endings, and some will respond to everything, including like temperature change. And remember with this, when we're looking at responding with that, all we're looking at is depolarization of the nerves, right, at their dendrites here to allow for then action potentials to be propagated up to the spinal cord and then eventually to the brain. So you can see here we have just free nerve endings within the skin, similar to different body parts as well, that are there, and they're going to sense any pressure from like any sorts of different pressure aspects. One of the ones that's painful is if you have swelling, right? We get pain just because we're pressing on those nerves, but also any release of chemicals. If cells are dying, different component like that, they release those different chemicals that then are sensed as pain. And we saw several of those different chemicals within our discussion of the inflammatory phase. So as you saw in the previous video, we do classify these sensory receptors based on where they are in the pathway. First order neurons are going to be peripheral nerves, right? They are afferent, right? And they enter on the dorsal aspect in the dorsal horn there. Second order neurons are going to be transmission neurons. Sometimes we'll see them abbreviated as T cells in some of the older models there, but those are secondary order neurons. And then third order neurons or higher center neurons occur now up within the brain and focus on the perception of pain opposed to transmission. So building off of that then, we have different first order neurons that are present. And you saw that in the previous video there, right? Where A delta fibers respond to our noxious mechanical stimuli, different components there. All right, they're smaller in diameter and myelinated with a slower conduction velocity compared to some of the bigger fibers. As we will see, the bigger the fiber, the faster it transmits its signal, as well as, if you remember back from your anatomy and physiology days, the myelination actually allows for the signal to jump. And so it goes faster down the axon. So we'll see myelinated also increases the speed. C fibers now are deeper. They are much smaller, and we'll see that here in the next slide. And they are the slowest conduction and require greater stimulation. We also want to throw in here right now A beta fibers, because they transmit sensory information there and they're larger diameter, and those will become important in gait control theory. So this slide here shows again A beta, A delta, and C fibers. Again, A beta and A delta are myelinated. C fibers are unmyelinated. Diameter, but most importantly, what I want you to look at here is their conduction velocity and the different speed. You can also see here what they transmit. But when all is said and done, what I want you to think of, A beta are large diameter, thick, myelinated, and are fast. A delta are large diameter, they're thinly myelinated, and they're slow. Right, and then C fibers, small diameter, no myelination, and are the slowest. So wrapping up the first order neurons, right, regardless of the type, we can see here what occurs after the initial injury. We have a release of potassium, prostaglandin, bradykinin from the different structures that stimulate the primary branches of the first order afferent nerves. Eventually, over time, right, the mast cells become active and they release histamine in response to substance P that's being released as well through there. And then you can get a spreading of that throughout then the area, stimulating more and more nerves. They're then going to go up into the spinal cord, and where they will then interact with the second order neuron. So you can see here now we have the first order neurons coming in through the dorsal horn, right? Their cell bodies are in that dorsal root ganglion, right? They're going to interact in synapse with second order neurons, and then the pain crosses over the spinal cord and goes up as pain, but in that same area we'll see touch is also being sensed at the same time, but it does not cross. And so some of this becomes, it does not cross till later. And so some of this becomes more complicated than it needs to be, and not really understanding or needing all of that. But know now that the second order neurons come, they are now in the spinal cord, and they are transmitting the information up to the brain. While at the same time, though, second order neurons also will have work as interneurons. So you can see an interneuron here for reflexes and like the withdrawal reflex. So we have sensory receptors, right? And even before it goes up to the brain, it will eventually go up to the brain as well. But you can see here a second order neuron acting as an interneuron that's then synapsing with a alpha motor neuron in the ventral horn that then sends a signal out to the muscle to contract that muscle there. So you can see there are reflexes within the spinal cord that second order neurons work as interneurons, just transmitting from one directly to the other. And we'll see this becomes particularly important in the pain spasm cycle as well, where we have this same thing occurring, but instead of withdrawing from a painful stimuli, eventually what ends up happening is the contraction of the muscle causes more pain, and we get in a cycle there as well. Then finally, the third order neurons, right, within the higher centers of the brain and the sensory homunculus, right, with that as far as the sensation of different areas of the body, again, right and left sides. With that, this is where we will have interpretation of the pain and the then sensation and perception of pain. So lastly, if we put all of this together in a basic just diagram to kind of see this whole component there, this adds a fourth order neuron there that goes from the thalamus then, or because the third order really goes from the thalamus to the sensory cortex, and then the sensory cortex will be interpreting that as well, but that's not really as important there. Third, fourth order neurons, I'm sure there's even many more throughout there. but we're focusing on first, second, and third order neurons. And the reason that we focus on these is because we can actually stop the pain at the beginning here, where we stop the sensation of pain, stop nociception from occurring from the standpoint if the first order neurons are not depolarized, right? Because we're blocking histamine, different components with that, limiting the cell damage that occurs. There won't be any pain that is occurring. At the same note, then, we can also block pain at the transmission of the second order neuron. And I put a yield sign here because we'll see that really we're going to do this through gate control mechanism of pain, where we will have a different first order neuron that then blocks the transmission of pain in that second order neuron, or just counteracts or increases it. Or we can block pain at the third order neuron by using the body's natural endogenous opioids, or the body's natural painkillers in the brain to decrease that sensation of pain, or perception of pain as well. So we'll be looking at all of this when we look at clinical management of pain later.